Hello, welcome to Indie Tutorials. My name is Guillermo and I would like to thank the patrons supporting this channel. Alrighty, so let's continue from where we left, and in the first place I will delete this game object. We are not going to use it nor use any of the player input stuff here, so let's click on delete. And the next step is to create under the scripts folders. I already did created a gameplay folder, then behaviors, which is to handle mono behaviors in my case. And let's create a new script and let's call this one input listener component. The naming doesn't matter, you can name it whatever you liked, but in my case, since I know that this mono behavior will be in charge of listening whatever input the input system is passing through, so that's why I decided to call it that way. So double click on it to open it in the Visual Studio or your IDE of choice, and let's wait for it to load. Alrighty, so once loaded, let me collapse this panel and increase a little bit the font so you can see all pretty well. So I'm going to add here a using statement for Unity. If I want, come on, Unity Engine dot input system. Okay, then again I'm using seal class because I don't want to create a new class out of this one. That's why it's the seal keyboard there. Alrighty, so the first thing we want is to have a private serialize field to hold our gamepad, or sorry, game input map. Let's call it input actions, and of course let's add the serialize field attribute to it, and then I will create a public gamepad input actions that will return our private field, okay, in case we need it later on to be called from anywhere else. The next variable we need is a private static vector2, and let's call it movement. Why we need it static is because if we open, let's compile the script and let me close this one. So if we open the ORK Framework, and if we go to the base control input keys and we click, for example, horizontal move, and scroll down where the input ID settings, where we set the input settings, and we change that to custom, you'll see that it's expecting to call a class or have a class name, but the function needs to be static. And in order to promote a variable inside a static function, that variable needs to be also static. Okay, so let me close this one and let's go back to the script and let's continue. So let's make some space here, and the first thing we need to do with the input action is of course to create an instance of it. So let's call it in the awake, and in this awake method what we are going to do is just to check if our input actions are null. If it's so, then we create a new one. Also, what we want to do here is to get this input listener behave like a manager or a singleton, kind of. So we want to not destroy it on load, so to keep an instance of this component through all the gameplay loop. right? So after we have in the wake, we have created these input actions. We now need to enable these input actions. So let me copy input actions, and I will do some spaces here, and then enable it. And as the same time that we enable it, we don't want to disable it when we disable this component. On disable, input actions, disable. Alright, so the reason I left some spaces here is to register or to the events that we have created. For example, for the movement, I'm going to be one step at a time to keep it simple, so we focus today in the setting up the movement and let ORK know about it. Okay, so here in the on enable, let's call input actions, then we have our move map, and inside the move map we have the move action, and this action we can register to the performed event. So when it's performed, so we click plus equals, and then we have an option to let Visual Studio create a function name for us. So let's click tab and rename this function on movement performed. And I apologize to use this long naming, but it makes it simple and clear for me as well. So let me just put this below the on disable, and let's do the same thing but the opposite, the other way around. So when we cancel the action, so input actions, move map, move action, and then we call the cancel event. So equals plus tab on movement cancel. There we go. Let me just move it below as well. There we go. So let's remove the throw new system not implemented exceptions. Okay, so on enable we are registering to some events. So the thumb rule here is to unregister them as well when we disable the component. So instead of plus here we change it to minus equals. That will handle unregistering these events. Alright, so when the movement is performed, what we want to do is just capture the context. I will let me just switch, rename this object to context. So I want to retrieve the value from the context, so read value. In this case, we remember it's a vector 2. That's what we want to do, and we can do the same here. So context, and when the movement is cancelled, what we want to do is set the movement to vector 2.0, which is another way to do it is just to call movement equals to default. Okay, so this will be vector 0. Alright, then remember that ORK Framework requires a static function. So what we need to do here is we'll create a region. So let's call it Mackie ORK static functions, and let's put the first one that will be a public float or public static float, and let's call it get horizontal axis, and this will return our movement.x, and we do the same for the vertical axis. So public static float get vertical axis, and this will return our movement.y. Simple as that. Now, in order to debug this, what we can do is just print it, debug log, vertical plus movement.y, vertical, and in the horizontal we change it to horizontal, and the movement is movement.x. The way that we are going to debug is that we are going to set up ORK Framework, and of course if we get these debug logs, we are certain that ORK is listening to this input. Okay, so let's save the changes and let's move to the ORK Framework editor. So window, game is love, Machinum. There we go. In the horizontal move, let's scroll down into where we see the input ID settings. The first place is that I don't want this to be running in the fixed update but in the update, and then instead of key code we change this to custom. And here we have two options, one is custom buttons and custom axis. Of course this is an axis, so we put here the name of our class, which was input listener component. So let's just copy that one to avoid typos. There we go. And the function is get horizontal axis. Okay. And for the vertical one, we scroll down, we remove the fixed update, we change the input origin to custom, scroll down, we paste the name of the class, and the function is get vertical axis. Hope I didn't type wrong there, and let's save the changes. So we have our two input keys. Come on. Thank you. Let's close the editor. And what we need to do here is to create a new game object. Let's call it input manager and assign the script to this game object. And of course we need also, or before that, let's run the game. So if we were to click on Ctrl P to start the play mode, you will see that nothing is logged. Actually, let me just change the play mode to focus, and we can see that in the console we have nothing print at all, even though I'm moving the joystick or pressing the WSD keys. So let me stop now playing, and if we were to go to Window, Game is Love, Machinum Scene Wizard, and from here we can add a game started, ORK game starter. That's all we need. We don't need to do anything here, just to make sure that the start game is checked, so it will initialize. And then let's save the scene and we switch again to play mode, and out of the sudden we have our logs. So now we are sure that ORK Framework is aware of our custom inputs. So if I now press the W key, you see that values are changed, and if I move my left stick, I get values as well. Okay, so let's stop play mode. And the next thing I want to do here in the input listener component is to make this script run before all of other scripts in the game. So for that, what we can do is either go into the Unity project settings, and here in the script execution order add manually our script, or we can do it by code by adding here an attribute which is the default execution order, and here we need to pass of course an integer. So in this case what I'm going to do is make a constant here, so let's call it public const int default execution order, and it's going to be equal to minus 10,000, and let's put this value here. Okay, so this will make sure that this script is going to be executed right before everything else. Alright, so let's give it a more try here. Ctrl P, and switch to the console, and here we go. So the next thing I want to change here in the script is a way to determine or to detect whether we are using the keyboard or the gamepad. So for that, let's stop this play mode and go to the script again. And what we can do, having the new input system, is create here, let's say over here, a new function that will check whether we are pressing any key in the keyboard. So for that we can create a public bool is keyboard or mouse, right? And then here we can return whether keyboard, the current keyboard that is connected, any key is pressed, and then we need to do a list of OR statements, or mouse current left button is pressed, or mouse current right button is pressed, or mouse current middle button is pressed. And the tricky one is detecting the mouse position. So what I found best is mouse current delta read value which will return a vector2 is not equal to vector2 0 or default. Okay, so if any of these conditions will tell us that we are actually using the keyboard or mouse. How to see this information? What we can do, for example, is using the onGUI functionality. So let's do it here. I want this functionality just be executed in editor, so let's add an if unity editor and end if, and here we have the onGUI method that belongs to mono behaviors. So here we want to print whether we are using keyboard, right? So let's click on, actually let's do an if is keyboard or mouse, then we print a label, so GUI label, and we need to pass a new rectangle. In this case it's going to be let's say 10 in the X, 110 in the Y, 200 the width, and 50 height. Then we pass a text to it, and let's set input switch to keyboard, right? And then we can pass, for example, the size of the font. So we can, for example, make here private GUI style GUI, and then create a new instance of it. And here in the method, then we set our new GUI font size to be, let's say, 18 pixels, and as another argument here we pass the GUI. Okay, so let's give it a try. After Unity compiles the script, Ctrl P to enter play mode, and now I'm start moving the joystick, and you can see already that as soon as I start moving the mouse, it switched to keyboard, or if I press any key on the keyboard, it switched to the keyboard. This is going to be handy afterwards when we wanted to switch images, let's say for inputs, to whether it's a gamepad or a keyboard icons in the UI, right? So I hope you enjoyed this video, and we will continue on the next one, setting up more actions and more inputs to start building our inputs system, and later on the character movement. Thank you for watching, and see you